All right. Let's come to order. Mr. Co-Chairman, today is the second day of our Blockchain Select Committee work here in Laramie, Wyoming. We are going to be looking at stable tokens, digital asset discussion, some previous legislation. So we've got a good full agenda of interesting topics today. Anything before we get started and take the roll?
Let's keep going.
All right, with that, let's take the roll call.
Senator Furphy,
Excused.
Senator Cost,
Here.
Senator Nethercott,
Excused. I think she'll be here in a bit.
Representative Stiff,
Here.
Representative Western.
Here.
Representative Yen.
Here.
Mr. Kaufman,
Excused. Be here soon.
Ms. Long.
Is Miss Long online right now, or is she?
It does not look like she's on the
Okay.
phone now.
I know she's coming in a bit later as well. She's got some work conflict. Excused.
Mr. Reville,
Here.
Co-Chairman Olson,
Here.
Chairman Rothfuss,
Here.
you have a quorum, Mr. Chairman.
Mr.
Excellent.
Co-Chairman, I
Yes,
would
sir.
note that the House of Representatives is here, present and ready to work.
Yes, you are. That's impressive. We're pretty close. Yeah, that's right. Usually there's about two of you for every one of us. So yeah, we're outperforming. And welcome everybody that's joining us both in person and virtually. Look forward to hearing your public comment. We'll have public comment after every one of the topics today. So we'll have plenty of opportunity to take that public comment here from you and hear your thoughts on some of the legislation that we're going to work. And with that, we'll get started with stable tokens and the Wyoming Stable Token Act. Everyone remembers this from last legislative session. We had a good bit of debate and discussion last year during the legislative session. And at this point in time, we wanted to bring back the legislation, try and address some of the concerns. So we have an updated draft of the Wyoming Stable Token Act with some tweaks in it effectively. And let's get Mr. Hopkinson to come up and kind of present where we're at with our Wyoming Stable Token Act as currently drafted. And maybe a quick high level perhaps, but focusing on the changes that we have in this draft relative to what we've seen previously.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. David Hopkinson with the Legislative Service Office, looking at 23 LSO 51, Working Draft 0.5, the Wyoming Stable Token Act. Mr. Chairman, there really weren't a lot of significant changes made in this version. Primarily, the only thing that's different is the staff comment that's been added, which incorporates at the last meeting, there was a lot of discussion on various issues and LSO was requested to kind of collect those and put them in a staff comment. And that's what's on page 2 there, just with some highlights of some things that the committee may wish to consider as they continue discussing this bill draft. Just a high level overview then of the draft itself. Working title, of course, the Wyoming Stable Token Act. We've got the definitions there in Article 2. One I would note is the definition of Wyoming stable token in paragraph 7 on page 4, just means the virtual currency issued by the treasurer pursuant to this act. And then virtual currency down below that is defined as currently we see in our existing digital asset statute. The draft provides that the treasurer is authorized to issue Wyoming stable tokens, that those stable tokens shall only be issued in exchange for United States dollars, and that a stable token is a virtual currency representative of and redeemable for $1 United States dollar held in trust by the state of Wyoming. The act in Article 104 is administered through the treasurer in accordance with this act and in consultation with the Investment Funds Committee. Provides that the treasurer shall adopt rules and has a list of duties and obligations for the treasurer, generally in consultation with the Investment Funds Committee and the Oversight Committee that is created later on in this act. The treasurer may, in that consultation with those two committees, issue stable tokens as provided in this act and provide for matters related to the issuance of the stable token, including things like retaining professional services, entering into contracts, and providing rules related to the use, issue, maintenance, and management of the stable token and requirements for redemption. The treasurer in subsection D on page 6 is required to maintain, invest, and reinvest funds received for issuing the stable token exclusively in treasuries as provided by investment policies recommended by the treasurer and approved by the Investment Funds Committee and the Oversight Committee. The treasurer may seek rulings and guidance from the United States Department of Treasury, the IRS, and the SEC. There's some more specific requirements related to the startup phase, and during that phase, the treasurer shall report not less than monthly to the Investment Funds Committee and the Oversight Committee. And then following that, in paragraph 4, provides that after April 1st, 2024, that the treasurer shall report not less than 30 days after the end of each calendar quarter to the Investment Funds Committee and the Oversight Committee regarding all activities involving this act. And finally, before issuing any Wyoming stable token, treasurer shall appear with the chairman of the Oversight Committee before the Select Committee on Capital Financing and Investment to present a comprehensive report on all actions that have been taken. Article 105 just provides for the Wyoming stable token account where the funds would be held, provides that 100% of all of the notional value of all outstanding issued Wyoming stable tokens shall be maintained in that account, that all earnings and funds shall be deposited in that account, and that of account funds in excess of 102% shall be first expended to pay for the operational costs, and then any remainder would be split equally on a quarterly basis into the Common School Permanent Fund Reserve, the School Foundation Program, and the Permanent Wyoming Mineral Trust. Article 106 provides for the redemption of the stable token and provides that one Wyoming stable token is redeemable for $1 US upon demand. The value shall be that $1 US unless the interest rate of United States Treasury bills at the time of redemption is negative, or the total assets divided by the number of outstanding Wyoming stable tokens is less than $1, in which case the redemption value would simply be the liquidated value of the United States Treasury bill as determined by rule of the treasurer, but in no case should that redemption result in the state paying a higher amount than the total asset in the account divided by the number of outstanding stable tokens. 107 just requires that notice of limitations on stable tokens be provided, that specifically that the Wyoming stable token is not insured by the state, and that the principal deposit is not guaranteed by the state beyond the notional value of the stable token account. 108 provides for limitations on liability and provides that the state is not liable to any person beyond any amount or for any amount beyond the notional value of the fund maintained in the stable token account, and that any stable tokens issued are payable solely out of the Wyoming stable token account, and that token holders can't look to any other funds for redemption of the stable tokens. It provides that Wyoming stable token is not an indebtedness or debt within the meaning of any constitutional or statutory provision, that they shall not be considered to be general obligations, but are special obligations, and the treasurer specifically shall not pledge the state's full faith and credit for redemption of any token. Subsection B provides for the immunity for state officials and state employees. And subsection C provides the Chancery Court has exclusive jurisdiction over all actions relating to Wyoming stable tokens. Subsection 1 or Article 109 then creates the Oversight Committee, which would be composed of the Chief Investment Officer, the Auditor or his designee, the Governor or his designee, one Senator, 2 members of the House, and 1 subject matter expert if the committee chooses to appoint one. That provides then for the payment of those who are not state employees, and provides that they shall oversee and review the audit of or the operations and transactions implemented in this act, including potentially the Commission of Independent Audits. Finally, Section 2 just provides within existing statute, requires the treasurer to perform all duties required of the Stable Token Act, requires the Investment Funds Committee to perform the duties they would have under this act. Section 3 requires the state treasurer to issue at least 1 stable token not later than December 31st, 2023. Section B provides for the Attorney General to determine whether or not this act would be constitutional or issuing, if there are concerns with the constitutionality of the issuance of any Wyoming stable token. And if they are concerned, it provides that the treasurer shall not issue Wyoming stable token, but that a report would be provided to the Committee on Capital Financing and Investments no later than November 1st, 2023. Section 4 simply provides the treasurer promulgates the rules and provides for $500,000 out of special revenue funds. And then section 5 provides an effective date of July 1st, 2023, with an immediate effective date for the rulemaking and funding portions. With that, I'd stand for any questions on the bill.
Excellent, thank you. Any questions regarding legislative draft? Okay, and I would call the. Oh, I'm sorry, Representative Stiff, I didn't see your hand. Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, just generally, Mr. Hopkinson. This draft appears to incorporate some of the amendments that were adopted by either chamber or committee last time around. Is it fair to say, does the current draft represent, is it identical to what we passed out last session, or are there changes in here?
Mr. Hopkinson, go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Stitt, there are some what I would deem more grammatical type changes, attempts at clarification, but there's no substantive changes from what was passed by the legislature.
Thank you. Any follow-up? So I do want to call everyone's attention to page 2, the staff comment, and this is, as noted, a collection of some of the concepts that were discussed at our last meeting that we would want to be looking at and considering as we work this legislative draft. Also, the committee will recall at the last meeting, we asked the governor's office and the treasurer's office to look through the legislation, think through the legislation, and try to come back with some proposals that would address the concerns that were expressed during the last legislative session, so that we might be able to tackle the challenges and get to a point where everyone is comfortable with a draft that we would put forward. And I know that we have some of those suggestions and some of that discussion ahead of us today, and appreciate the work that was done by both the treasurer's office and the governor's office on bringing those updates to us. Before we take that next testimony, we've got a treasurer here with us. Welcome, Treasurer Meyer. Appreciate having you. And before we get there, any questions or discussion within the committee?
Senator
Any further
Rothfuss?
questions? There we go. The voice from above. Hello, Miss Long. You were here with us. I didn't see you a few minutes ago. Welcome, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Question for LSO. Has there been any analysis of whether this token would be deemed a security under securities laws?
Thank you, Miss Long. Mr. Hopkinson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Long, I have looked at that. I think that is a fair question of whether or not it could be. On its face, there are certain elements of the how we tested it doesn't quite pass. So perhaps not, but I think there are arguments for why it could be. So I think it is an open question.
Follow up, Ms. Long.
No, thank you.
All right,
So, Mr. Chairman.
go ahead, Representative Stiff.
Follow that through. So if it were deemed to be a security by the Securities Exchange Commission, what does that mean for what we would need to do, or the state treasurer would need to do?
Mr. Hopkinson, thoughts on that?
Mr. Chairman, I would defer to those with more expertise in that matter than I have.
Representative Stiff, any follow-up? And obviously the legislation suggests that that type of consultation can be made beforehand. That's a provision of the legislation, is to provide the opportunity to have consultations with federal agencies to determine whether there would be any such concerns. One thing that we've noted in the past is that some federal agencies are reticent to provide any advice beforehand. So they might only make such a determination after it exists rather than before it exists. Hopefully we can do better than that as a state trying to advance something like this. and get to the point where it's crafted in a way that it wouldn't be a concern. Now, it is certainly structured in a way where, in my opinion, Mr. Co-Chairman, it's pretty hard to call something that is a value-backed or asset-backed dollar, in fact, asset-backed token where the dollar is held in trust and there's no possibility of appreciation of the asset. To me, if there is no possibility of appreciation of an asset, particularly in an inflationary environment, I think you provide an assurance that it is not an investment instrument. I would say it would be a terrible investment instrument. I'll go on record saying right now, don't invest in the Wyoming stable token as an investment interest. It will be terrible in accomplishing that objective. But as an exchange of value and as the currency that it's intended to be in terms of a virtual currency representative of a US dollar, it should work effectively. Not to put you on the spot, Mr. Kaufman, do you have any thoughts? Obviously, I think you're the most experienced among us in terms of trying to make some of these decisions.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I'm afraid to say I haven't done a deep analysis of this, but I have heard folks argue that a government issued stable token in some respects is probably going to be treated similarly to a government issued bond with respect to securities treatment, in that there are exemptions for government and bank issued securities of that nature. So it may well be a security, but there might be an exemption for it.
Interesting. Okay, thank you for that. And that is something that we obviously, if we enact this legislation, it's a key provision to have those consultations and to make sure that we're positioning ourselves appropriately and that we don't end up running afoul and creating a security that has to be managed by the holders as such. Any additional discussion on that point? Thank you, Ms. Long. Ms. Long, any follow-up on that?
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. No, I would just comment that we've done this before. We've had extensive consultations on the bank charter and look where we are. So it doesn't always work to have extensive consultations with federal agencies in advance of doing something. And so in some ways, one of the lessons is that you actually have to act before they will give you an answer. One of the other challenges to be aware of is that even if something's not an investment contract, the manner of distribution of it might cause it to be an investment contract under securities laws. And so that is one other question. What is the state's plan for distributing this? Do you know yet?
Yeah, Ms. Long, and that again is something that is intentionally part of the path forward of how to implement. If we constrained that within statute at this point in time, those consultations would have less flexibility. I think it's essential that there's some flexibility for the method of enactment so that we're capable of addressing those exact types of concerns. And you know, that is something where I think if we do proceed with this, we need to be very thoughtful about using an effective and appropriate mechanism that doesn't, once again, put us in the crosshairs. Thank you for that.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Anything else? All right. Seeing none. Thank you, David. Appreciate it. Then with that, let's invite the treasurer up. Treasurer Meyer, welcome. And anyone from your staff you'd like to bring up with you if you choose to, please come on up. Mr. Treasurer, thank you so much for working with us on this, and both last year during the session and in the interim so far. Floor is yours, and please, we're looking for ways certainly to improve the legislation to try and resolve some of the problems and think through how to effectuate the outcome, recognizing that there's a lot of nuance to the process.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I think I'll address the bill and I'll also address the governor's letter, because I think that goes right to the point of trying to get everybody on the same page. And just looking at it, and looking at the staff comments, I think one of the, I'm trying to figure out a way to simplify this, and I think I came up with it, was that if you look at the Oversight Committee, and I can tell you, I've got a lot of oversight committees that I deal with, and I look at my calendar, and I'm either at the WCDA, the SLIB meeting, or the IFC meeting, or the Select Finance Committee meeting. Practically, at least two of those show up on my calendar, I think, almost every week. But I was looking at a way that we could consolidate some of the efforts and get the expertise that we necessarily need. And I want you to think about going over at the Oversight Committee composed of the membership there, and looking at trying to put together the Oversight Committee with the one area there that whether we should set up a digital advisory committee. And I'll go into, first of all, that the chief investment officer from our shop, he's an employee of the treasurer, and you're asking him to be a chairman of an oversight committee. That seems a little bit odd in that regard. And the chief investment officer has a lot of things on his plate, and I'd hate to take things, and put more things on his plate and get him away from what he was hired to do, and that's being an investment officer. One of the things that we might consider would be the new employee that we're hoping to bring on, which was the chief operating officer, and see whether or not we can find a skill set that would be have more subject matter expertise in digital currencies. Unfortunately, we still don't have that individual because the A&I has not brought forward a job classification after having it 2 months, knowing what the legislature was going to pay him and knowing what we wanted him to do in our office. They still don't have a classification. I'm not sure what the holdup is. We've communicated several times, but that's what one of the, I guess, oversights that our office has is A&I, in those areas. It's frustrating both in HR and in contracts. I'll attend to some recommendations later on in this. But if we go over to page 12, I would think that I don't see any subject matter expertise at all in the auditor or their office, or necessarily even in the governor or their office, or in the legislative offices. And what I'd suggest, and for that matter, the treasurer's office doesn't have any particular subject matter expertise in crypto, is that that rather than these be members, that they be appointors of a subject matter expertise. And the committee would also do two things. They would function as oversight, much as the IFC in a way, as advisory committee oversees our office from the standpoint of having the subject matter expertise of investing, trying to have a committee that does both oversight, but also has a subject matter expertise. And so looking at the legislative office there, you make up your mind whether you would want to have be an appointor of one or two members on the committee, depending on how much, I guess, effect that you'd like to have in that. But trying to get that kind of consolidate those two things, but making sure that if you're going to have somebody advise you or oversee you, that they actually know what they're overseeing and they actually have that subject matter expertise and are able to give specific advisement in areas. so that's one thing that I think that you could consolidate all of those different things into the Oversight Committee. I know it's a new concept, so I guess roll it around a little bit. If you got some questions on it, how you think that it may work or may not work, welcome for the conversation.
Committee questions on that concept before we go on? Go ahead, Representative Stiff.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Treasurer, thank you. Just so I'm clear, so on page 12 of the draft, where we have the designated chief investment officer as one person in the Oversight Committee, you'd replace that with something different. Is that right? Who?
The chief investment officer, I think that rather than chief investment officer, we might say that the chief operating officer. And that would be someone that would be more or less have the chairman duties, but wouldn't necessarily have and had the duties for more of the implementation that's necessary for the program, but necessarily not the advice duties, but more or less the person that runs the meetings, organizes the meetings, gets the right people together to attend. But so that's where I see that person coming in that capacity. And then on a day-to-day basis, if the program is in the treasurer's office, and that operating officer would know what the advice would be directly and would be better able to take that advice, run it into the process of developing contracts, developing RFPs, developing those type of things that would move forward, into the process and the day-to-day management.
Representative Stiff, follow up.
Mr. Chairman, no, thank you. I think we just, so there was a suggestion is to replace the word investment with the word operating. And that would get you where you need to be.
So I have a
yeah.
quick follow-up for that, Mr.
Yep.
Treasurer, and kind of the concept. There's two things that I see, and I might be misinterpreting one of them. And we have the IFC as the advisory committee, and we have this committee as an oversight committee. And I believe what you're saying, correct me if I'm wrong, is that we should set aside the IFC and utilize this oversight / advisory committee for both purposes, but they shouldn't necessarily have the authority. We can figure out how to deal with the authority, but they're basically going to provide all of the advice and oversee the program. And then we'll figure out the actual agent of action from the executive branch to get that done. Or do you think that they should be the agent of action to get things done?
Well, I don't think they should be the agent actions, but I would think that, and this is where I get to, some way to speed up the process is that if you could say that recommendations, for contracts and advice on contracts or advice on personnel or advice in these different areas would be exempt from the A&I HR and the A&R procurement areas, but not exempt from the AG. I mean, you still have to have contracts that are in there, but get some level of flexibility provided that this advisory committee would have a recommendation. Then that would be something that necessarily wouldn't need additional oversight from another branch of government that doesn't have subject matter expertise.
Understood. Thank you. And as far as just that Romanet 1 question that Representative Stith was asking, what we have further down is the auditor, the auditor's designee, the governor, the governor's designee. The concept that I think you're going for is that you would have a designee depending on internal subject matter expertise. And so maybe that's the better way to phrase each of these would be along the line of a designee. So we don't have to hardwire a chief operating officer or something along those lines into the legislation, but just to say a designee with content knowledge or subject matter knowledge, something along those lines. Is that a more appropriate solution?
Yeah, I think that would be fine, but I think that I think you guys should maybe come up with a little bit little bit tighter of a definition, because what I've seen in other areas, and I'll use this in the areas of investment, is that it's kind of loose as to what, when people say, you know, people of good business acumen, you know, to go on an investment committee, that
Right.
sometimes you just get their friends that gave them the biggest campaign contribution, you know, so, you know, I think you want to have a little bit of more meat on the bone, kind of more or less kind of like the meat on the bone that we have for the chief investment officer, where we say they have to invest so many, you know, dollars or have accounts in their historical, you know, resume. So I think there's something that should be, you know, in their historical resume as far as the number of years of expertise that these designees would have. And, you know, if you still want to have the auditor have a designee, you know, that's entirely up to you. I'm not sure, you know, one auditor, the next auditor, whether they have the expertise to appoint someone. But if you have those sideboards that says you have to pick from a pool of minimum qualifications, and I'm not going to tell you what the minimum qualifications are. There's a lot of people in this room probably can sketch that out a lot quicker than I could. But
Great. Okay.
Yeah.
I think we understand that. Any questions on this again,
Yeah.
on this topic, this specific point? All right, seeing none, please continue, Mr. Treasurer.
yeah. So I think that would allow, if you get those, if you get the subject matter expertise and the person from our office, you know, actually has some operational capacity to take the advice from those folks, like our chief operating officer, then that gives you a couple of things. It gives you some, I guess, some longevity in the program from one administration to the next administration, because that's an employee that more likely than not would stick through different election cycles. And if you have that flexibility, it would probably work closer to than like the WCDA. The WCDA, they can onboard people, employees. Essentially, they do it probably more often than not, that they'll onboard an employee before the old employee leaves. So if somebody gives you a 2-week notice, a lot of times they'll have people on there within a week or 10 days, so they can spend a little bit of time with the person. In the process that we have now in HR, that hardly ever, if ever, occurs. So, and the same thing with RFPs and the process for getting things done. I know we want to use a headhunter for our COO. We can't do that until we actually get a job description, and so we can. I mean, we've got the job description, but we need the job classification. So there's all of those dominoes that have to fall in today's current system before you can actually do any implementation. So I think that if you're looking at a deadline, that's you know, you almost have to exempt from ETS, from the procurement and from the HR, or you're not going to reach the deadlines that you're talking about, because the system is just going to gum it up, and it'll take months to, you know, even if you want to move at warp speed, you know, you can't. It just doesn't work.
Understood. So the concern there would be effectively that we need to make sure that we aren't holding this back through bureaucracy, and that whatever organization we're setting up to enact it is nimble enough to actually
Yeah.
carry out the mission.
And I think I'll go to the governor's letter here a little bit.
Okay.
And looking at the proposals. I can get to that. You're right, in 2 different places. Yeah. And if you look at the proposals and you go down to line 4, after the parentheses, period, since most operations, including technology, accounting, auditing, custodial responsibilities, marketing, could be outsourced, the staff necessary to maintain the operations, and the fund would be small, and that they would be dedicated to the stable token, and their attention would not be diverted elsewhere. Essentially, that's the concept that I had on ring fencing, that you would ring fence not only the accounts, but you would ring fence the operations. You need to do that contractually. So I do agree with the proposal that came from the governor's office. We just, I think, call it different things. So you have ring fencing in two ways. You can do it operationally, and you can do it otherwise. But this is where all of these things here that you have to do as far as doing the contracting, that I think that all has to be exempted from the standard way that is moved. All right.
And any questions on that point? So this gets to, and we'll hear from the governor's office. Might have been handy to hit the letter first and have response, but
Yeah.
any questions? Go ahead, Representative Stitt, and maybe we'll contemplate doing that. It might be a appropriate interaction. Go ahead, Representative Stitt.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Treasurer, again, just so I understand what your proposal is, you're saying that when it comes to doing the procurement for the vendor services necessary to implement this, which would be largely involving software programs of one sort or another, or some kind of computer programs, you want enterprise technology services to be cut out of that process. Is that what you're saying?
Well,
Go ahead, Mr. Treasurer.
I think that they can be used as in an advisory concept, but there's so often, unless you put I guess they could be used at that if statutorily they have to come back with their recommendations within a time certain, because sometimes you get things in there and they sit on people's desks for quite some time. And a lot of things, I think I'm going to need to do a deep dive in that a little bit to find out whether everything that goes to them is actually necessary to go through them, because I think they're getting swamped. I really do. I think they're getting bogged down in minutia, and we got to figure out some way to if you want this thing moved forward in a timely manner, you don't want to get that process bogged down.
Sure.
So
Representative Stitt, any follow up on that? Okay. Treasurer Meyer, I do think that it would be appropriate to have the governor's office present their letter prior to responding to the letter. And I realized that obviously I called you up first based on how we had it on the agenda, but I think it'll end up being confusing to have the responses go before the presentation. Do you have anything else that you would like to add before we go to that? And then obviously I'll come back to you and give you an opportunity to provide.
there's a couple more things.
Yeah, let's hit those.
If they're emphasized, in the governor's letter, I'd certainly appreciate the ability to respond.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Anything before then? Anything else you want to add before we go to the governor's office to walk us through the letter? And again, you'll have another opportunity, so no worries.
Yeah, I think most of it is the investment funds committee, from what we understand, talking to them, and we tried to reach out to a couple of them. I don't know whether they're going to call in or not, but they're essentially they know a lot about investing, but they don't know that much about cryptocurrencies and blockchains and digital assets. So, and like I say, the Oversight Committee, I think, get the expertise on that. Let's see. Yeah, and I think, if we get that changed, I think some of the other recommendations that I had as far as trying to streamline the process, so the treasurer isn't waiting for, basically approvals on different things as you're trying to move forward, because that just means you're getting the committees together, and they have to make up their minds on stuff that they haven't seen, and it takes a lot more than just quarterly reports to actually get information in front of committees so they have enough to actually make a decision on. And We don't want to be like a Board of Education that just feeds people exactly only what they need to do to make a decision in the affirmative. So we want to make sure that people get all sides of the equation.
Great, thank you. Then, yep, obviously stick around and we'll get you back up here in a couple of minutes when we have had the letter presented. Thank you both. All right, Governor's office, come on up. Ms. Anderson, good to see you. Welcome and appreciate having you here and appreciate the work that you did on putting together this memo with some not only detailed response to concerns as well as we requested, which we appreciate, specific proposals for actions that might remedy those. So thank you so much for this work since our last committee meeting, and the floor is yours. Welcome.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Co-Chairman, members of the committee, my name is Betsy Anderson and I'm the Deputy Chief of Staff for Governor Gordon. Good morning. I did, at the request of the committee, we did put together a memo and you specifically kind of asked for proposals and recommendations. So in the memo, I really didn't go into the issues that much. I feel like we had the veto letter. We discussed it at the last committee meeting. So I really tried to focus more on the proposals and recommendations that was presented. It is part of the meeting materials. I'm happy to walk through each of the categories if that's.
I think that would be helpful, please. And the committee has had it and read it, but I think for the public's edification, it's handy to walk through.
So the first issue that the governor had raised in the veto letter, and we talked about at the last meeting, is the implementation of the program. And currently the 2022 legislation had the implementation through the treasurer's office. We discussed those concerns. One of the proposals that the governor brought forward was to bring it to the SLIB. And they would be the ones that would have the authority over the Stable Token Act and make the final decisions. I see this as, and it's not for me to tell you how to set this up, but I would see it as a somewhat small office. You would have an administrator or a director. They would have, as the treasurer mentioned, they would have a oversight committee, IFC committee, whatever committees you deem necessary for them to implement the act. But we do see that a lot of this is to be outsourced and pursuant to a contract. So at least what we were envisioning is that it would not be a really large staff. So that was the first issue. Again, I think I've mentioned in the memo, if there's other ideas, we did think about a variety of agencies, and if there were other agencies that you could put that in, we just could not come up with anything, the one that's the auditor's office, but they are a regulatory and auditing department. We thought that was very inappropriate. I don't think, and we could not think of any other agency that currently exists that would be appropriate.
Mr. Chairman,
Go ahead, Representative.
just so I understand, and I may not understand how the State Loan Investment Board works as much as I should, but I had the impression that the State Loan Investment Board sort of acts to the Office of State Lands and Investments, that all the people who are actually working and getting things done and preparing for the meetings are in OSLI. Am I wrong about that? I mean, are you suggesting essentially putting this function into OSLI, or who's going to show up to work to actually do this? Who is it?
Ms. Anderson.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Stith, actually, they sit as the State Loan and Investment Board and the State Board of Land Commissioners, two separate boards. Definitely OSLI handles the State Board of Land Commissioner matters. When it comes to the State Loan and Investment Board, they do the investments, and the treasurer and his office run that part of the meeting. And so that is the State Land Enforcement Board. There are some loans, drinking water, clean water, they're the mineral royalty grants. Yes, OSLI does administer those programs for the State Loan and Investment Board, but there are definitely parts they're not. And just recently, the State Loan and Investment Board is now doing charter school approvals, as Co-Chairman also knows very well. And so, and that was really coordinated through the Department of Education. So the State Loan Investment Board does have authority over programs that the Office of State Lands and Investments does not administer for them on a substantive basis. They do administer because they send out the meeting notices. They do set up the meeting times and they do that type of just general board administration. But the substantive administration comes from the applicable agency. Now, I will note that the investments were part of OSLI back in the 90s, a long time ago, and I wasn't here. I don't know how that looked. I don't know if OSLI had a separate division or how they handled that. But back in the 90s under Treasurer Stan Smith, the investments were handled by the Office of State Lands and Investments. So I'm just saying, I don't know how that, I don't want to get into the weeds because I feel like that's not the role of the governor. I'm just trying to take, but I mean, I don't know if it's a separate group, if it's a division underneath OSLI or how you do that.
Mr. Co-Chairman.
Yeah, Mr. Co-Chairman, Betsy, I think to your last point there, it seems like this is a fascinating concept because it seems like you could structure it in different ways under the SLIB. You could, we don't know exactly what it might take. If it takes one technocrat to really understand these investments, it seems like you could create, Representative Stith, one position under state lands for this one technocrat who understands investments in cryptocurrencies, and that would be the advisor to the SLIB on those investments. No different than it would be if it were under, pick your agency or your council, even under the treasurer's office. It's really going to be, I would assume, one individual who has that expertise that's going to be making the recommendations.
Representative Stith, thank you.
Mr. Chairman, I just don't understand what we get out of that. I mean, if there's an expertise that we don't have that we need, right? Then we need to hire that. I get that piece, right? But I don't understand the benefit of putting it with SLIB because by definition, this is not an investment, right? Our chairman was just saying that, right? So why is it part of the State Loan Investment Board? It just seems odd administratively. It seems like the treasurer's office is where it should be. And if we think that the treasurer's office is understaffed, well, let's deal with that issue. I mean, I'm not sure what mileage you get out of it, taking it away from the treasurer's office. I don't get the benefit of
Mr.
that.
Co-Chairman,
Go ahead.
well, Representative Stith, you were, as I recall, you were on the Appropriations Committee that amended this bill, and one of the things that the Appropriations Committee was trying to craft was an oversight board. And in the end, the oversight board strangely looks like the SLIB board. You have the auditor, you have the governor, so why build out a whole separate board, this oversight board, when it already exists? Isn't that what this is? And I don't know, maybe you could speak more to those amendments, what the idea was to them, but that's I thought the oversight board, that's where it ended up, was with a representative from, because you already had the treasurer's office, you had the auditor, you had the governor's office, I guess the Secretary of State, and the education wasn't on there.
Representative, feel free.
Mr. Chairman, this seemed like the Oversight Committee is a different function than the running of the program, right? And I thought that the Deputy Chief of Staff was talking about sort of running this program.
So this is something that it is a little bit unclear, but I think that might be intentional based on some desire for flexibility. Maybe it's not fleshed out in the weeds, as Ms. Anderson was saying. But there are a series of different functions that have to take place. There is the programmatic implementation of transacting a stable token for the dollar. That transaction, as you know, probably will end up being outsourced. I don't think we're going to be doing that internally. And then a supervisor of the project, that individual, I think, can operate in a few places. But as far as kind of the investment side, as the state holds those dollars, treasuries will be purchased. that's the one function that is SLIB-like, treasurer-like. It gets into an investment realm. And I think that's then a position that we need to, or a role, responsibility that needs to be placed somewhere as well. And so I guess the question I would have is there any specific aspect of these responsibilities that the governor's office would like overseen by the SLIB, or is it, as we're doing right now, where investments end up coming to the SLIB? If this investment of the dollars as a strategy is being prepared to purchase treasuries, which that's an easy strategy. I might even be able to get that one right. I'm not sure. Probably shouldn't. But that strategy, it would make sense for it to go through the same type of approval process, where if it's developed out of the treasurer's office, it still comes to the SLIB for approval of this is the investment strategy associated with the treasuries that shall be purchased for the dollar. Is that the concept, or where are the bright lines there, or are there no bright lines? Go ahead. and then we'll get back.
Mr. Chairman, and some of this goes back to the governor's concerns that the treasurer's office has a lot on its plate. And so I do think that there are some operational concerns and issues here, not just the authority. And I might kind of be skipping ahead a little bit in the memo here, in that I do believe having an administrator or a director or someone who is solely devoted to this, who is not distracted by any other operations that I think the treasurer's office would present. And this is all getting the governor to a comfort level of this, the risk and rewards, right?
Mhm.
I would help mitigate the risk. And I would say minimum qualifications that we're talking about an expert in digital assets that would then, you would feel like you have a really strong person who could oversee all these contracts. And there might be a staff involved, one or two people. I just don't know what that would look like. But I think that would help in that the treasurer's office has a lot that they're working on, and that we would have some staff that's not diverted by other issues that may arise that pull people off the task. And I will say that's kind of my idea, but I'm trying to think of ways that would get the governor to a comfort level on the risks that this would present.
Thank you, Ms. Anderson.
Mr. Chairman,
Go ahead, Mr. Co-Chairman, then Representative Western.
Betsy, do we know on the IFC, Ms. Anderson, I apologize, Ms. Anderson. Do we know on the IFC how many members have a particular expertise in cryptocurrency?
Ms. Anderson, go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Co-Chairman, I do not know. Some of those members are members that were appointed back when I was in the treasurer's office, but we were not doing digital assets and cryptocurrency. So we really weren't asking those questions. So the treasurer might have a better idea of what their experience is.
Okay.
Representative Western, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Anderson, I guess this question is not just to the governor's office, but also I think just in general. I guess first part is, one, how much consultation was done with people who have specific experience and knowledge about the maintenance and day-to-day operations of running any of these exchanges, like the folks at, I don't know, FTX or, Ripple, or any of those guys, to really know exactly what is required to thoroughly and properly operate, a venture like this. And two, what is required? Because I don't know, and again, this might reveal my ignorance by the consultation that was done by the chair, by the governor's office, but I think certainly I'm a little in the dark. I have no idea exactly what truly will be required if we pass this, we find domain, because I do imagine that some technical staff is going to be necessary. I'm sure if we talk to the folks at any of those big exchanges, they're going to say, well, you need a person for this, a person for that, a person for this other thing. I think it makes sense to give the treasurer's office the authority to hire those kind of expertise with the salary necessary to recruit them. But where did the governor's office do any of those consultations with people who have that specific knowledge?
Ms. Anderson, go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Western, we were not consulted with regards to this bill, so I can't speak to that. I will say that, and I'm skipping ahead again, the next comment is the startup and really no fiscal note. So that made it difficult for the governor and no business plan of what it takes, the timing, what contracts would be necessary, what type of ongoing maintenance would be required, when would we cover our costs for the program, at what size, what type of marketing issues and how big we think this would become. So those are all a bunch of questions that when the bill came to the governor earlier this year, we just had no answers to any of that and would think would be very helpful.
Mr. Chairman,
Go ahead, Representative.
Ms. Anderson, my apologies for being long-winded in my question. I will be much more succinct. Since session ended, between then and now, has the governor's office consulted with any of the type of personnel or expertise, again, at the big exchanges who do deal with this stuff on a day-to-day basis on what would be required to maintain and operate this kind of operation?
Go ahead, Ms. Anderson.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Western, we have not.
Thank you.
Any further questions on this topic before Ms. Anderson proceeds? Seeing none, please continue. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, yes, the next topic was kind of the startup and the deadline issue. And the concern is we just don't have, the governor didn't feel like he had enough information to understand what it would take to start this up. $500,000 was appropriated for the startup. We have no idea where that came from. We do have concerns also, as the treasurer's mentioned, and I think I referenced in the last committee meeting, is the procurement requirements. And he's also mentioned ETS and HR. Those can get you sideways sometimes. And those are, I think, things that would have to be accounted for one way or another in the timing of the program. And we did not see that. As to the deadline, I had no proposals or recommendations. I understand your concerns that without a deadline, people can take their time. And it is important, at least for this committee, that this be quick. But the problem is that leads to rush decisions. And I could not think of any kind of compromise or middle ground that would solve both of those concerns. I will say that the end of the year is very aggressive. If this was to pass next session and be effective immediately, knowing the different type of bureaucratic requirements there are, December 31st of 2023 seems very aggressive.
Okay. Thank you. Any questions on that? On that concern? All right. Seeing none, please continue.
Mr. Chairman, the next is actually not an issue, but I just wanted to reiterate that the AG review that was in the bill of 2022 was definitely important to the governor. We would expect to see that again. We understand that you are already considering some of those concerns and are trying to address those, but that was important to us. The final issue is, and I entitled it Benefit to Wyoming, because I believe the governor is struggling to understand what is the benefit to Wyoming of this program. And a lot of this revolves around what I said, the risk reward assessment. His risk is the reputation to the state and all the work that is done in the blockchain community and digital assets, and does not want that reputation to any way suffer. And you balance that with the reward, and he just doesn't understand what the reward, what would the state get that would merit that risk. So I will say that helping anything you can do to help alleviate the risk side of the equation and indicate what the reward side of the equation is would obviously be helpful. And things we've talked about, like a dedicated expert, that's something I could see would give the governor comfort that we have an expert that's met certain qualifications that will not have any other responsibilities but to set up this program. I see that as something that might help mitigate the risk. Certainly not having a deadline would help mitigate the risk. Just different ideas like that and him making his decision. And then I do always have to stress that there's nothing I cannot sit here and say, if you do X, he will sign it. And if you do Y, he will not. He will make that decision when the bill gets to him. As you probably know, he talks to a lot of people when he considers those decisions. And I do think in this bill, the market is a factor as well as what we're looking at with the market. And I would just point to Mr. Reveal's comments in the last committee meeting. I thought they were very telling. And, that is something that the governor thinks about as well as to what's happened in the market with cryptocurrency.
Any questions? Go ahead, Representative Stiff.
Mr. Chairman, Ms. Anderson, I think your point about the lack of a fiscal note in our last bill is well taken, because obviously we need to have a careful analysis of what's this program likely to cost to get set up, what its likely ongoing expenditures are likely to be, and will that be offset by any revenue that the program might generate. And I guess the problem is that the revenue it might generate depends upon how successful it all is, right? And if it turns out that we're showing up for a race on Monday that was held the day before on Sunday, then people might not be very interested in this program. And then you've set up this administrative machinery that costs money, but you're not making the spread on it that you intended or had hoped to make. So I think those are all very fair points. And I think when we talk with the treasurer's office again here shortly, we'll probably ask about what does it take to set up the fiscal note, and how do we get a grip on how successful this is likely to be. So I think the governor's concerns are certainly well taken on that, and certainly appreciate all of your comments. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Any further questions or comments on that point? Ms. Anderson, did you have any response to Representative Stitt? I'm sorry, I should have given you the floor.
Mr. Chairman, no, I guess a little bit I would say, being first, if that's the sole thing that is going to make this successful or not, I just don't believe that's the case. And I would worry about, we just have to be first or this is a failure. I think a strong program that's well thought out is really what's going to make a successful program. But I do understand that first is an element, but I don't know that I would rank it as the number one element.
Any thoughts, committee? Thank you, Ms. Anderson. All right. And Ms. Anderson will probably bring you back up also as we have more questions. Thank you so much for the presentation. Thank you. Ms. Treasurer, come on back up. Yep. Now that we've had a presentation of what you wanted to respond to, that's always a handier order of operations. It is. It's easy to respond to something you've heard.
Yeah, I think it was I think it was interesting to say that there's nothing we can do about the bureaucracy to speed this process up, and we should just stay the course and leave all of those roadblocks in the way. I think from my perspective, the bandwidth that's in this administration needs to address the problems that are before us, as far as the inability to timely onboard employees, to timely do contracts, and to timely address the processes, because this is just a microcosm that came before us today about the inability of this administration to move forward in a timely basis. That you've got a timeline that you think that you should be able to meet. If you were in the private sector, it wouldn't be any problem whatsoever. And so that's really one of the big elephants in the room. I'm going to address something specifically in this memo that I want to draw a little bit of light and truth to. The area there where, and since your last meeting, that we have lost both the general counsel and the senior investment officer. Now that smacks of a innuendo that this is something that was our doing, that we had something to do with losing our general counsel. Well, our general counsel was getting $20,000 to $25,000 less than our WRS general counsel, when that is 1/3 the size, and we could not go through that process in A&I to get her a raise. And so she's going on the greener pastures. Our senior investment officer, he went from 189.5 a year and a potential of a 75% bonus to a $600,000 a year job, working at home, unlimited vacation, a group of analysts to help him with his endeavors, and a performance bonus. And
Can
South
we get the
Dakota,
name of that?
you get the name of that outfit. Yeah. And frankly, we're probably going to have a lot of competition in other areas because South Dakota pays their people $260,000, where we pay 189.5, and we go to 75% bonus. They just got an increase to go from 200% bonus to 225% potential bonus. And they average 80% across the board. So that's paying last year, the average was $468,000 a year for their senior investment officers.
Mr. Chairman,
Yep, go ahead, Senator.
thank you. Mr. Treasurer, are you asking this committee to raise state employees' salaries?
Go ahead, Mr.
Well,
Treasurer.
Thank you, Senator Nethercott. I'm merely saying that if we're going to continue with an investment office, that this year.
Mr. Treasurer, are you asking us to raise salaries? That's the question. Simple.
The salaries needed raised,
Okay,
yes.
thanks.
Yeah. In those areas, if you're going to continue the investment office and the returns on that, Mr. Chairman and Senator Nethercott, is that our reference portfolio lost roughly 15% of 25 billion, and we lost less than 5% of that during that time period. So that's a differential of $2.5 billion. $2.5 billion a year. I think we can afford to raise the salaries on the people that made that differential return available.
Thank you, Mr. Treasurer. And I concur with that. I think we need to revisit a lot
But,
about salaries.
Mr.
But
Chairman,
yeah, let's focus back on.
it's clear to me that the government, the governor wants this for whatever reason. He wants to put it in the Office of State Lands. I think it has nothing to do with whether or not the treasurer's office can handle it or has the bandwidth. Because we've clearly proven that we can make the money, and we've done it. We've onboarded our accounting system, and that's running well. And so those things are moving forward. We do have problems with the bureaucracy, and that's one of those things that we struggle through. We know that it's going to take us months to get people onboarded, and that's just the cross you bear when you're in basically this state government. Chicago, I mean, Illinois can do it in less than 30 days, but it takes us longer. So, Mr. Chairman, I think that there are some things that I do agree on, and I think we all agree on, is that we do need some subject matter expertise to move this thing forward. I do agree with the Representative Stiff's analysis of the Office of State Lands and those employees, because it's statutorily, it says that anybody hired by the Office of State Lands is under the direct control of the director of the Office of State Lands, which is Jennifer Scoggins. And so if you have an employee that's hired by the Office of State Lands, they're under the control of Jennifer Scoggins. I don't believe that Jennifer Scoggins has any subject matter expertise outside of the law practice in the energy industry, and the Office of State Lands is probably not the most efficient run organization in the state either. So, those are, I guess, things you have to look at.
One moment, Mr. Treasurer. Go ahead, Mr. Co-Chairman.
Co-Chairman, Treasurer Meyer. To that point, though, and we recently engaged in a SLIB board process using charter schools. And obviously there's no expertise in OSLI for education, but I think the way that worked was the Department of Education simply provided the,
They do the heavy
They were the
lifting.
expert in the room.
Yeah.
So, and I'm, just trying to flesh this out. If it were the SLIB board treasurer, wouldn't your office be the expert in the room, similar in that process, providing the recommendation to SLIB? At least that's how I would envision it, similar to how the Department of Education did in that scenario. And I thought it worked pretty well.
Treasurer
You
Meyer,
know-
go ahead.
Yeah, I think that you're still going to have a subject matter advisory board. Because the IFC, they do not have any subject matter expertise specifically in cryptocurrencies. It's just not there. They've got great subject matter expertise in private equity, years and years, and maybe 100 years or more in private equity, but essentially zero in digital and crypto assets. So no, that expertise just isn't in IFC. It's not in the SLIB board. That's something that this legislation, I think, has to develop.
So along those lines, Mr. Treasurer, you look back at the history of programs that we have accomplished through this select committee and the task force, and whether it's the work that we did on property, whether it's Speedy Banks, which we've been talking about, and typically the entities that we've handed these roles off to within the government that became responsible for whatever provisions they needed to implement, they didn't have experts, but they were empowered to hire experts. And I think we recognize that. And then at other times, when we've faced this demand that an expert be in place before we do something, and that we create all of the appropriate bureaucracy and have all the I's dotted and the T's crossed, we've honestly, collectively, we've failed at every one of those projects. None of those have gone forward because we can never dot all the I's, we can never cross all the T's. Bureaucracy is never satisfied that they're fully and sufficiently bureaucratic to get the job done. This select committee honestly doesn't care how things get done. I don't think we do. I think we care that we have a quality product, a quality solution that enables rather than regulates, to facilitate an ecosystem for digital assets, cryptocurrency, and all of the other things that we have as our mission. This is yet another one, and again, digital identity, registration. We've had a number of things that have come across our agenda that we've stalled on. And we've stalled for the same reason, that we end up getting to the, well, we need to know all the details. We need to know every last detail before we can even start. And we can never satisfy that, because you can always ask one more question. So then my question, and I'll ask Ms. Anderson too in the governor's office, is how do we get there from here? I don't want to get in the middle of a fight about resources. I don't care who does what. I want, in this circumstance, to see a Wyoming stable token exist. And if it fails, honestly, the way we've structured it, okay, we didn't create a giant risk here. It's a US dollar backed token. We hold the dollar asset. Failure is external, risk is close to zero internal. And there are a lot of paths to get there from here. So my question to you, and you don't have to have a perfect answer at this point, and I'll ask the governor the same thing. How do we get to the objective? What do we need to have in place to get to that objective? And how can we get everybody on the same page working towards that mission, as opposed to trying to figure out and use, honestly, this is a forum for venting, I don't know how many years of concern.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I think you look at it from the standpoint is, first of all, it has to pay for itself. I think Representative Stitt brought that up, and perhaps Representative Western also. The Treasurer's Office, with doing our internal bond trading, can do that for the third the price of what it takes to go out and hire a bond manager. So for absolutely, that's where the bonds should be bought and sold and traded. And that, I think, is, that's a standalone thing that can be accomplished. Then the other thing that I think you need to do, and we talked briefly about this coming into the meeting, is that that there's a possibility that you could have a transactional fee for each one of these to offset operational costs. And then you wouldn't have to wait until you have profit on the bonds. You'd have that operational cost paid right up front, and that would move forward. And then there would be more, dollars that necessarily would be able to split after operational costs to the three areas of your concern. So I think those are two things that you do. That's as far as the first things, amendments, getting this thing off to a running start. So you don't have to wait. Yeah, have that transactional fee just do it to offset the operational costs. And then I think that's a very, very small part that'll be there. I say that the next thing is that basically charge our office. And if you want to do it in conjunction with the governor's office, I can still work with them, even though we get a little hot under the collar from time to time, to go out and we've talked to a couple of different folks that have what they think is the best idea for Wyoming going forward, but we need to look at other vendors. And I think we first of all identify probably the legal team that's going to do that. I think we identify the custodial bank, because I do think that we need to ring fence off the custodial bank, because you don't want to have the blending of bonds, by account number, whether, anywhere. I think, and from what I understand is that US Bank is one that does custodial crypto stuff. So that's something I think the first place we would probably start is looking at that. And we'd probably go back to a lot of the people that testified beforehand and say, okay, and Patrick has already done this. He's got the names and numbers of people that we need to call to say, okay, what is it going to take and how much is it going to cost? And so we need to cost that out. And we do need to get the management plan together, and I think those are things that we can do.
Go ahead.
Does
Coach
a
Chairman.
SLIB have to be involved? I don't think the IFC or SLIB has to be involved, but if it's a matter of getting this thing across the line for you guys, I'd say give the SLIB a role to play, but I don't think it's the operational role to play. I think the treasurer's office does that, but I think there's room for everybody in. But I was hoping that we could make it simpler from the standpoint of just, being able to have one expert advisory committee, operational committee that took care of the matter. So it was kind of more like the WCDA, a part of, but apart from the government.
Mr.
Mr.
Co-Chairman, Mr. Treasurer, I think can you flesh out I know we had the transactional fee conversation, but on the records, because I want, I'm sure we'll have industry responding, and your industry doesn't care if this is SLIB or IFC. I mean, they're not going to help us sort that out, but the transactional fee, I am intrigued by that. So talk a little bit more about that.
Well, I turn it over to Joel. He kind of brought that up the other day when we were at our treasurers conference, and that's really the first that I heard of. I think it's a program. It's an overlay of programming called, was it Lightning or?
That's right.
Yeah.
Joel, Mr. Reveal, you did give a presentation on that, and now I remember wanting to ask you to give some of that summary to the committee on.
Mr. Reveal, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I did speak at the Treasurers Conference. We talked a little bit about stable coins in general and this Stable Token Act. The specific reference to transaction fees, Treasurer Meyer, I don't remember the exact specifics of it. I apologize.
Yeah, I think it was one of the countries that did a crypto coin, and that they use this other I guess layer of programming to be able to take a tenth of a cent or something on each transaction.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you for reminding me, Treasurer Meyer. Yes, so slightly different use case there. That is the Lightning Network, which is a layer 2 protocol built on top of Bitcoin. Bitcoin is a layer 1 protocol that El Salvador has adopted as an official currency. And the government of El Salvador is benefiting from taking a fraction of the transaction fees that are charged as part of that. So slightly different use case here,
Yeah.
but could be applicable, Treasurer Meyer.
Mr. Co-Chairman?
So, Mr. Treasurer, Mr. Reveal, I mean, when I think of a transaction fee, I think of like a 2.49%, 3% credit card fee, but we wouldn't have to charge anything near that because of the potential volume of the transaction. It'd be like 1% or less,
Probably much less.
much less.
Yeah. Go ahead, Mr. Bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think that this gets to a bigger question, which is the attractiveness of the stable coin in the market and whether people choose to adopt this as part of their DeFi protocol. So stable coins, stable tokens are essentially right now, because of there is no central bank digital currency, you can't get from a US dollar fiat into a DeFi protocol to do whatever it is you want to do. So if you want to do so with a stable value asset, you convert from US dollar to a US stable coin, and then that is your sort of on-ramp into DeFi. To the extent that that on-ramp has friction costs, it will become less attractive. So while there may be the opportunity to take some little transaction fee, the greater that transaction fee, the less people are likely to choose, say, the Wyoming stablecoin over Circle or Tether. Now, there, however, is quite a significant profit available, especially given where rates have gone since we first contemplated this. I think 1-year treasuries went through 4% yesterday. So a 4% yield would be earned on these dollar assets, none of which, as it's currently contemplated, would be due to the token holder. That would all be accruing to the state. So I think that whether you take a few basis points in a transaction fee or not is sort of dwarfed by the potential earnings from just investing these reserves as you would a money market fund and keeping that income for the state.
Thank you, Mr. Bill. And that's certainly my inclination as well. I think transaction fees would hold this back and make it less appealing on the market when there's no reason for it in the long term. I mean, I understand the treasurer's interest in trying to find us a zero cost upfront solution. That's always going to be more popular. And therein lies a little bit of a challenge. We like to bootstrap everything and we don't like to have to appropriate, but the reality is the long-term value proposition, if this is successful, is vastly superior to anything we'd end up getting from the transaction. Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, to Treasurer Meyer's point, I think that it's a matter of semantics, that what could be earned from the marketplace, I think, is fungible here. And so if let's just use this 4% current yield on a 1-year treasury today, if some percent of that should be allocated as processing transaction administrative fee internally, that's sort of irrelevant to the marketplace. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah.
And that's obviously how the legislation is currently structured. It's not
Right.
explicit, but it's implicit that administrative costs are taken up front.
Yeah, I think the optionality would be good to put into it, but as far as, I think there's transactions within Wyoming, like paying taxes or paying fines that, I mean, right now, you're paying 2 or 3% on your credit cards, where, I think there's some areas where there's plenty of room to have a small transaction fee if the alternative is considerable.
So that gets on the merchant side as opposed to the blockchain side, and charging transaction fees on the merchant side, which we do now. And you're right, it's typically 3%. And I'm not a big fan of that policy. I didn't like the bill that we passed a couple of years ago on it. But that said, it's certainly the way we do things. And so if we had a merchant interface that had a 1% fee associated with it, better than the 3%, and ends up transacting in Wyoming stable token, yeah, the people of the state would prefer that.
Yeah.
But that's very different than actually incorporating it into the algorithms of the blockchain and having some sort of layer 2 functionality that distributes back, to the mothership a 0.1% or something like that.
Yeah. Mr. Chairman, irregardless of where you guys jump off on this thing, I think that the treasurer, I think our office should be the ones that are, purchasing and selling the bonds. I think that you should have essentially a vendor that does all the other work, and we're just instructed as to, how many we're carrying every day.
And as we get to that, and this gets back to Ms. Anderson's question, in terms of developing and Representative Stiff's interest of ensuring that we have some sort of a detailed fiscal note based on an expectation of how this might play out. And I think that's fair, as long as we're not wedded to the fact that that is how it will play out, but we can come up with how it might play out. I think in that instance, to meet the concerns that we've heard from the governor's office, maybe we need a dedicated bond trader if we don't already have one. That's
We already have 3 people in that. Yeah.
okay. And contemplating additional workload, trying to assuage those concerns. We need to talk that through. Thank you, Mr. Treasurer.
Okay. All right.
Mr. Chairman,
Yep, go ahead,
if I
Representative.
may, just for the treasurer. Mr. Treasurer, let's imagine that we pass this bill, we get it all set up, everything goes great. And it turns out either that the market's just not interested in it, or the federal government steps in and just outlaws this, which it could. Would it make sense in this bill to have some kind of set out procedure for how we wind this program down and kill it if we want to at some point?
Yeah, I think the marketplace is probably going to show that, and when that occurs, it just depends on whether you want to do it after a legislative session and action that repeals this and in a way that it does, or whether you want to do it right away, in between legislative sessions.
And Representative Stiff, I think as far as winding down the financials of it, it's actually relatively straightforward, consistent with the language of the statute as it is right now, where you'd have a distribution. If there's more that we need, though, there's no reason not to have some wind down provision, and then whatever the tripwire is for the wind down provision. No problem with that. And as we potentially learn more about where it would be implemented, if that involves some timeline for the reduction of the associated staff or something like that, again, I don't think that makes a difference. If it's a success, that's great. If it isn't successful, then it's perfectly reasonable that we'd want to wind it down expeditiously, make sure everybody's made whole, and move on. It's the appropriate solution. So if you have any thoughts on that, we certainly can do it. I don't see any reason why we'd be averse. Any further questions? Go ahead, Senator Cost.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Treasurer, I'm just going to ask, what do you see as the greatest threat if we implement this to the state of Wyoming?
Go ahead, Mr. Treasurer.
Yeah, thank you. I think a change in technology, and I think that's a threat to a lot of these currencies that are based on technology, because within probably 6 years, you're going to have a lot of quantum computing capability, and the codes that were essentially unbreakable. I think there's a possibility that that I think we have to have an analysis of that. I guess if I could snap my fingers, I'd say let's do a quantum coin, and which has more security. That is, was probably like where the Bitcoin was, at its infancy. But those things being said, it could be the thing that goes bump in the night, because all of these coins are so much more secure than probably the standard credit card or the wallet in the back of your pocket, so I think it's all relative, I mean, that's something that will come out, but I think that as we move forward, that we have to be cognizant that just as we have to be cognizant of cybersecurity, that's probably the one thing, the most reoccurring aspect of any of these projects, that you better have some really good experts that know what they're doing. And I think most of those are going to be contracted with. Yeah.
And just as a quick addition to that, there are a number of different technology groups around the planet that are working on quantum proof blockchains and so that is effectively resolved as long as you take into consideration the best available technologies out there, so we can.
Technology
do that.
chases itself.
Yeah, it does.
Yeah.
Further questions for the treasurer? All right. Seeing none, thank you, treasurer. Ms. Anderson, did you want to come back up and provide any additional response, or are you okay where you're at? Please feel free. What's that? Do you want to? Okay. All right. Thank you very much. All right. With that, let's go to public comment at this point. I know we've got some public comment. Let's see some hands. Okay, Scott, go ahead. I know that we've actually got a letter from you. Who else wants public comment, just so that I know where we're at? Okay, excellent. Thank you. Do we have any additional public comment online at this time? Nope. Okay, thank you. Go ahead. As always, welcome and introduce yourself to the committee. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Chairman Rothfuss. I really appreciate the opportunity to present today and the ability to submit public comments. I want to speak specifically to the benefit to Wyoming and of a real world use case for the Wyoming stable token. A little bit about the American Crypto Fed. I'm one of the organizers of the American Crypto Fed DAO. We were the first DAO that became registered in Wyoming on July 1st, 2021. So very, very proud of that. Our mission is to create and sustain an inflation and deflation protected currency. So we view the Wyoming stable token as a bridge to this for being used in real world transactions. And my apologies, I missed yesterday. I was down at the Merchant Advisory Group annual conference in Texas. So yesterday and the day before, I was speaking to many merchants about the Wyoming stable token and what the possibilities are of using that as a bridge to so that we're not talking about just digital transactions and as USDC or Tether replacement, but to use this for real world transactions as a bridge to the Ducat economy, which the merchants would use. To give you a sense of the scope, the Merchant Advisory Group is comprised of the senior payment executives at the top, I think it's 170 merchants today now in the United States. So you have the senior payment executives, treasury, fraud protection and mitigation. That's this group, and their whole purpose is to lower the cost of payment. So my apologies when you mentioned transaction fees. Oh, okay, because we're bringing it to a zero cost.
I saw the look on your face.
Yeah, our goal is a zero cost real time credit push transaction. So for the merchants, this is the holy grail. And the Wyoming stable token, you have a token that is backed, that is 1-to-1 to the US dollar, backed 100% by US treasuries. And then the state earns revenue off the float. I mean, that's beautiful. Okay, and it really works well in this use case. So how big is the MAG? Okay, it's the top 170 merchants in the United States. As of 2019, which was the last stat I had, their transaction volume was $4.8 trillion. 60% of the credit card spend in the US, I know north of 50% of the credit card spend in Wyoming goes through MAG merchants. And John Dreschny, the CEO of MAG, has testified before this select committee a few times. I'm positive you would be willing to come back and talk again. So what we see is, okay, and this is hypothetical. Okay, but I just want to give a sense of the scope. If 10%, say in 3 to 5 years of the MAGS transactions are now, instead of using dollar, they're using the Wyoming stable token as the entry point. Okay. The same way that Mr. Rovell talked about the Wyoming stable token being an on-ramp, off-ramp to DeFi, this would be an on-ramp, off-ramp to real-world transactions at merchants, both in face and online. So if we're able to garner, let's say 10% over a span of 3 to 5 years, what would that mean? That would mean that the amount that you would have for the float is $480 billion. Okay, billion. Okay, and I couldn't do it on my calculator because it doesn't go out to the 12 zeros, so I had to do it by hand. So my calculations were that the float that you would earn would be between 0.5% to 3%. So I was a little shocked today to hear it's at 4% already. But at 1%, that's $4.8 billion in float to the state. Okay, and to my last recollection, I mean that's close to your annual budget for my understanding. And that's just from the retail use case. Okay, that's just from the merchants holding the Wyoming stable token as a reservoir to onboard and offboard transactions for those customers and suppliers that need dollars. So you're talking, and we're not even talking about the amount of money that would be in the hands of individuals. So a couple of final points, and I'm happy to be open for questions on this. I would love to go deep with the Treasurer's office, with the Governor's office. We would like to invite MAG leadership to be part of this as well. We're looking for a win-win-win for the merchants, zero cost transactions. For consumers, they're earning revenue. They receive rewards for every transaction that they perform, and for the state, the return on the float is exponential. So a final point I'd like to make is, in order to ensure that this goes beyond Wyoming and hits multiple states, that first mover advantage is really, really, really important. This will happen. Okay, and it's just right now Wyoming has the lead and has the opportunity and has the open door to the merchant community. So let's consider this, and if the state is able to receive the Wyoming stable token as natively for payment of sales tax and as a merchant yourself, that fully legitimizes the token. So you have a wonderful, wonderful opportunity. Please do not leave billions of dollars on the table. And we're talking billions. We have the opportunity for a prosperous economy. Okay, where I'm looking at this at 4%, 19.2 billion, and that's off 10% of the MAGS transactions. So thank you, and open for questions.
Thank you very much. Go ahead, Joel.
Thank you,
Rovell.
Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Scott. Would we not be competing against private sector stable tokens as well for this merchant market share?
Go ahead, Mr. Mueller.
Yes, you would be competing against private, but from my perspective, the Wyoming stable token would be the best stable token out there on the market today. Okay, because you're backed 100% by U.S. Treasuries. I would strongly advocate against any transaction fees, because the amount of revenue that you'd earn from the transaction fees is very minimal to what you would earn from the float, and it also decreases the attractiveness of the token.
Mr. Bill, go ahead, follow up.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Scott, for that. I fear that, I guess I think this is a comment that we discussed in the last committee meeting, circles investment policies, its transparency, what it's doing with its reserves, I think is becoming increasingly clear to the marketplace. And I don't know that just by having 100% treasury backed state stable token, we create any distinct advantage versus where the market has gone, and certainly where the market will be by the time something like this could come into play. Circle's been operating since 2013 with hundreds of employees and hundreds of millions of dollars of venture backing. They just raised $400 million round this spring from BlackRock, Fidelity, and others. That is a massive disadvantage for what we would be creating, I fear. Question mark.
Go ahead, Mr. Mueller.
Sure, thank you, Ms. Ravel,
Yeah.
but from my perspective, okay, I can speak for the American Crypto Fed DAO. Okay, and I can also get a sense of the merchant community. But for the American Crypto Fed DAO, USDC can work. We would prefer to use the Wyoming stable token. One of the reasons why I feel more comfortable with the state as an entity than a private entity doing this, especially when we're talking about the scope of this. Okay, because this is very large. Circle also doesn't have the ability to act as a merchant and to receive payments in their own token, but the state does. We will advocate to the merchant community to use Wyoming stable token. And I think you have an opportunity for the merchants to get very, very deeply engaged with the governor's office, the treasurer's office, the steering committee, and to really understand what is the need, the use case, and how to do the rollout.
Joel, any follow-up? Thank you for that. And Mr. Mueller, I think that would be useful, would be to have the merchant advisory group maybe put together their thoughts and share with the governor's office and the treasurer's office, as well as our select committee, because I know that one of the governor's question is what's in this for the state of Wyoming, other than just the revenue. And I think it may be important to get their perspective. They do represent trillions of dollars of transactions, and I think it would be compelling and useful to have that viewpoint. And one other thing that has been a struggle for this select committee and task force over the years really is what one idea that's a non-starter, I think, is trying to, and has been, is trying to get the state of Wyoming to trust any cryptocurrency enough to take it to pay taxes or for anything else. And it is essential that we're able to do that. That's one of the key puzzle pieces that has to be in place. So even if we don't end up with $400 billion of assets under management, which I'm hopeful for, I like your 480.
That's 10%.
Yeah, I'm with it. Even if it was just a sufficient amount under management that we can transact as a state in a digital currency with all of our citizens, I see that as a win.
Agreed.
And we can do that if we're holding the dollars and externalizing the coin, the token. We can do that. I think if we are actually the ones that have the dollars in a treasury, we can probably have confidence when we're paid in the digital asset that it's good for it. And I don't know how to convince anyone, whether it's the treasurer, the governor, or any of my colleagues in the legislature, to accept anything else, whether that's Circle, certainly not going to be Tether. You can rest assured it's not going to be any other recently headlined stable coins. So I think there's more to it than just the dollars off the float. Yeah. Go ahead, Mr. Reveal.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to just comment on that and maybe build on that, which is that I agree with you. I do think that just getting the platform in place is a smart move by the state. And I think that there is probably some use case out there that we haven't yet thought of. And whether there's some way for the state to create sort of a tax exempt income stream through a state stable coin, or what it might be. I think there is some use case, or there's a reason why merchants would prefer this as opposed to Circle or Circle's partnership with Visa, MasterCard.
Well, and sorry, and if I can clarify.
Mr. Muller, please.
Sure. We would be using it as a bridge. Okay, so the merchants are transacting in our currency, which is Ducat, and it's a stable token, but it's not stable to the dollar, stable to purchasing power. Okay, so and we're also have the ability to do rewards off of that token, which you are unable to do with the Wyoming stable token. So just as the Wyoming stable token as itself, it is not a motivating factor for the merchants to be involved with it. But that coupled with the Ducat, now you have something that's truly compelling, because we have no bank accounts. We don't deal in dollars, but we'll deal in the tokens. Okay, we'll deal in a virtual currency representation denominated in dollars. So that and we would prefer to work with the state than with an outside entity that at any point in time could freeze accounts.
Sorry, any further questions? Go ahead, Representative Stiff.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Mull, I'm not sure if this question's appropriately directed to you or to somebody else, but I'm interested just in the logistics of how this works with respect to the processors of this stable token. I assume there's going to be some entity that acts as an analogy to a market maker. So US Treasuries, for example, when they're auctioned off, Cantor Fitzgerald essentially acts as a market maker, and they buy it all and they hold it for 90 seconds and resell it and make their fee. How does, obviously the state treasurer's office or OSLI or the SLIB or whoever it is in the state is not going to be running all of the machines to do the logistics of issuing stable tokens. I wouldn't think. We're going to be outsourcing that to some vendor. What's the model? Does anyone know how those people are going to get paid for what they do? Because they're not charities. They're going to want to make money on this deal. So what's the business model there? Are they going to be invoicing the state for their services? But I mean, what does it look like? Maybe I'm addressing, I should have asked this question to somebody else. I don't know.
Oh, no,
Mr.
worries.
Muller, go ahead.
What's your best guess?
You
Sure.
can probably get that one.
I can't answer it for the Wyoming stable token. I can answer it for our system. And we have verifiers. So who does the KYC AML and enables the wallet for the individual, then and that we anticipate could be Speedy Banks. I don't, from my reading of the Wyoming Stable Token Act, aren't you pushing it onto the banks to be the issuers? Yeah. So, but it's their compensation structure in the crypto Fed DAO, they're pretty happy, but I don't know how it's going to work with yours, but I think they would receive some administrative fee or management fee. I'm not the guy to answer it.
And I'll just directly at that, Representative Stith, typically any entity that is doing a transactional exchange with cryptocurrency to fiat is already taking a transaction fee for that exchange, even though there's no transaction necessarily, although there is depending on the blockchain, but depending on the token, there'll be some de minimis or non-existent transaction associated with the blockchain transaction, but there'll be a transaction fee based on an exchange managing the transaction. So when you're changing currencies, you typically have an exchange fee. That exchange fee is on the order of 0.1%. And so you can imagine that the existing business model that is used would be a lucrative business model for any exchange. And that's why it's so easy to list a new cryptocurrency, because for the exchanges that they've got nothing to lose. They'll either sell it or not sell it, and it's largely automated.
And I forgot to mention, I'm here. I would love to speak with the governor's office, with the treasurer's office, go deep in the numbers. So yeah, we'll make it happen.
Thank you so much. Any further questions? All right, seeing none, thank you very much. Okay, who is next? Come on up, please join us. Welcome. Please introduce yourself to the committee, and the floor is yours.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. Thank you to the committee for having us. My name is Anthony Apollo. I am the CEO and founder of Rensa Games. We are a video game development and distribution company built on the Ethereum and Polygon blockchains. We are also the team that's running this year's hackathon. So if you are interested in that, that is us. And we have a very real world use case germane to the Wyoming stable token, which is that the interest of this year's sponsors in funding their challenges for the hackathon was that we were performing the funding with Matic, which is a cryptocurrency on the Polygon blockchain. And it does have some volatility to it. It's oscillated somewhere between 75 cents and about $1 over the course of the duration of the competition. So having a stable token would be pretty fantastic. And we are certainly going to be one of the first in line to use it. I believe my comment here is a bit more definitional. On page 3, we define token holder as a person who lawfully owns one or more Wyoming stable tokens. However, it would seem to me that we are looking to create a digital analog of a US dollar, which can be divided into many cents. So I think just to quickly state, I'm thinking that we should add some language here that would include fractions of a token, because we know that these things can be divisible up to 8 decimal points, 18 decimal points. And we also, or if that is a intentional design, I would recommend an explicit comment about a de minimis amount.
Thank you for that. That's a good point. And we can contemplate that and either change the language or think back through whether we want a token holder to be somebody that owns one or more and whether that's justified. I appreciate you calling that to our attention, and obviously it would be fractionalized. Any further thoughts? I
There's
appreciate that catch.
a lot of things to think about. I think my sentiments probably echo what's been said and what will be said shortly. So I don't need to take up too much of your time. I just wanted to kind of throw that out there because again, this is something that we are very interested in using and hope to deploy it in the near future.
Excellent. Any questions for Mr. Paulo? Go ahead, Mr. Revelle.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a quick question. Why would you choose the Wyoming? Just curious why you would choose the Wyoming stable token over another option like Circle. Thank you.
Go ahead, Mr. Paulo.
Thank you for the question. We are a Wyoming company. It's important for us to support what's happening here as just kind of a general sentiment. But also there is concern when using some of these other tokens that are held by or issued by private companies that they're not always US dollar backed. That is an important consideration to us. We don't like the surprises where we find out that things are backed by a combination of dollars and short-term commercial paper, which has happened more than once kind of along the way over the last couple of years.
Any follow-up, Mr. Bill? Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you for having Mr. Paul. Appreciate that. All right. Any additional public comment, please? Did you have your hand up? No? Okay. You were just, okay, come on up and then, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Co-Chairman, committee members. I appreciate the opportunity to be here. My name is Pamela Norton. I'm the CEO and founder of Untitled Chapter and Borsetta Labs, 4th generation Coloradan, a resident of Wyoming now, and moved my companies here. I went down the rabbit hole and
welcome and thank you.
Yes, I am. So I'll give a little context, a little background on what has brought me here today. And again, appreciate all the work that you have done over the years. I've been coming to the hackathon for the past 5 years, a huge supporter of everything that the state has been involved with. But so I launched Borsetta Labs in 2017, focused on bringing back trust, transparency, and security to our country. We were securing high value assets on the blockchain and uncovered some interesting problems in that area that people didn't really want trust and transparency. They liked the middleman, they liked the messy paperwork that they could alter. We then secured a contract with the US Air Force to design a very sophisticated AI system on a chip. And it was in that process that we used our patent process for titling any asset. And what we were focused on was the problem of identity, key management, obviously, and asset ownership. Who owns what? And that's really the problem, the fundamental problem that we have been working on solving. So Title Chain is a digital asset titling service company. And we are focused, as you know, a titling service, right? That we know in today's world, do you have a, title for your house, car, and so forth. Our focus right now is on intangible assets. It's a $31 trillion market. When you look at patents, trademarks, copyrights, trade secrets, what's on 80% of the S&P 500, their valuation today is in intangible assets. It's not necessarily trucks, factories, and so forth, right? We also know right now we are in a recession. We are facing a depression. And I am extremely concerned about what is happening to this country. The printer has been on overdrive, and we need to focus on how do we create hard money, right? How do we tokenize assets that are of value that can be backed by a stable coin of the Wyoming state of Wyoming that is real tangible value. We don't have that today. When you look at companies' books, right? Any of their intangible assets is a side note. It's a footnote, right? We now have the ability to create a third ledger for companies. And that ledger can have real-time data fed to the valuation of those assets. So the first problem we're solving, and there's a lot of language that I would like to submit in regards to this stable coin, that first and foremost is a self-sovereign identity. There are standards out there. It's W3C standards credentials. It is the World Wide Web Consortium. It follows GDP compliance and so forth. I know the state of Wyoming supports this because we all know how important our self-sovereign identity is. So I take self-sovereign identity of my Wyoming. It's been issued and credentialed. It's a decentralized identity that, yes, the state can revoke it, right? But I have title of it. And there's importance, I think, of getting property title rights in this documentation that recognizes that I own title, whether I have a digital twin of my physical driver's license, that the DMV is the only one that's credentialed me that has access to that information. My credentials for University of Wyoming would be different, my credentials for my company. But as a citizen, I want to have control of my self-sovereign identity. And the same for my entity. So my entity that I have signed up here with the Secretary of State, same process, that I own that entity or I have shareholders that are provisioned. So then we ensure the privacy rights of not only the person, but the entity. We've also partnered up with the Global Legal Identifier Foundation out of Switzerland. It's a 20-digit code. So any company here that is setting up their company has the ability to also have a global ID number. So you have a Secretary of State, global ID. And then the third is the asset. Who owns what? And it really begins with intellectual property rights before you can start adding anything to a supply chain. We have over 500 million in intangible assets that are ready to be onboarded on title chain. I need the help of states like Wyoming to give confidence, not only to investors that are on the fence right now, but also to IP owners, right? And IP holders. They don't understand. It's like, what is it really backed by? Who controls my keys? You know, being able to onboard these 500 million in intangible assets with key management being supported by a speedy, right? Who owns custody? Who has custody access or provision? It gives us the ability at any time from a government or regulatory perspective that that title might be seized, right? That title might be destroyed. There's a variety of opportunities. So we're offering a Web 2 world. We live in a physical world. How are we representing those digital assets in a way that's trusted and secured? And I believe we're going to reduce risk for the governor's office because we can pilot these applications tomorrow. We can onboard. We have a mineral rights property in Idaho. It's a very significant mine that we can issue the title rights for those owners to help them get money to fund. It's a rare earth mine. It's a significant mine that the state is supportive of. And to have that mine, to have the backed, pegged by a virtual currency issued by the state of Wyoming, it's not a security. And I have some very specific definitions that I've written out that the stable coin is not a security. It's what you do with the asset and how you package it up. Are you going to do a private placement, stock token offering? At that point, it's a master NFT. And this is also, I think what's really important is if we define who owns what, who has what, whether it's licensing, royalty rights that they will be issuing, we reduce the problem of NFTs and everything that's in the marketplace right now because people are being taken advantage of. Companies don't know how to secure their intellectual property on the blockchain, and they don't know how to do it in the metaverse. And what I'm saying here is Wyoming can be the showcase for the world. Everyone is watching us right now, and they're saying, what's happening in Wyoming? And I said, we are working alongside with the state, and we can prove it in a way that the Treasury Department is assured. You understand that there's going to be titling fees. Every time someone's entity is verified or validated, the state will get a microtransaction payment. So there is a value of also onboarding those assets. The keys of those assets will physically reside in Wyoming, which is a really interesting use case because there will be eventually issues around regulatory and legal that Wyoming will take precedence for those assets. So I do believe that we can onboard the 31 trillion in assets to help change the economic conditions that we're facing right now. And otherwise, the world is happening outside the United States right now. And I can tell you for the past 5 years how difficult it is as a small business, as an entrepreneur, to get any traction in this market. So I appreciate, I can submit my documentation however, but I know that was quite a bit there, but thank you again for the opportunity to share.
No, thank you so much, Ms.
yeah.
Norton. We appreciate that, and certainly appreciate having you here. Hopefully you were following what we've done over the past couple of years with regard to digital identity, and we did have good legislation a couple of years ago. We're focused on trying to implement the self-sovereign digital identity principles that you mention and lay out. It's statutorily challenging because, again, other states haven't really done it quite the way that it needs to be done, and we've looked around a little bit. Colorado had some recent legislation on it. Obviously, we have some interesting legislation that Wyoming Digital Asset Registration Act. I think that's something that's probably on your radar based on what you're saying as well, where we're trying to get into that intangible property aspect. So we value your input on this, and hope you'll keep working with us on it. Any questions for Ms. Norton? Any questions? Seeing none, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Appreciate having you. All right, come on up. Good to have you back. Welcome back. It's good to see you again, and please introduce yourself to the committee.
Hi, everyone. I'm Jade Barker. I'm with Silicon Prairie. My business partner, David Duccini, is back here as well. This is our second time coming to this amazing event. I think you guys have done some incredible things, including this stablecoin. This is maybe one of the best pieces of this type of document that I've seen. Mostly because I don't trust other small companies to be in charge of printing money. So I think it's super clever to have it just within the treasury of the state, just basically because as a technologist, we've seen too many other small companies at a certain point just get greedy and somebody runs with money. So Silicon Prairie actually has quite a bit of experience in the securities space. We have a regulated investment crowdfunding portal. We have an SEC transfer agent, and we also have a FINRA reporting broker dealer. So the question, Representative Stith, that you had about like, what would it look like if this was a security? I just thought I would share. Essentially, there is a process that if you want to have a lawfully issued financial security and have it tied to a cryptocurrency or token, the way that I would recommend you do it is go ahead and assume it is a security. People get this kind of idea like it's going to be super hard to go deal with FINRA or whatever. We've been helping small companies issue financial securities since like 2016. So we've done a few hundred of them, like, I don't know, $20 million worth of deals. So that's not helping a government issue, but there absolutely are exemptions around when a government is trying to issue a security that is like, hey, if you're a state municipality, any of that has its own whole thing. If you want to issue a financial security, there's all sorts of flavors that you could do. A bond could make a ton of sense. But then the missing piece a lot of the crypto weirdos miss is that you need to have a transfer agent in the loop. And that is where you take the lawfully issued financial security, add the cryptographic key pairs, and mint the kind of digital version of that. And that's the right place to have the appropriate transfer restrictions. A lot of times people miss that if you're trying to make something that's paired to a real world financial security in the digital space, the transfer restrictions are definitely the choke point. So transfer agents are registered with the SEC. There's about 150 companies nationally, so there's enough to pick from. And there's a handful of transfer agents that are working in going ahead and issuing a security on a different chain. So there are vendors that you could go find to help do that. Some of them are just basically putting on an Ethereum token. I don't think that rises to the level of what you need, just a heads up. I don't have any dog in that fight, but I wouldn't go that direction. And that point, you can basically have it on whatever chain. So you could have it chain agnostic. Once you have the security that's been lawfully issued, either getting a registration with the Securities Exchange Commission or an exemption from registration. It really depends on how much money you're thinking about. So if it's just $5 million versus 75 million versus endless amounts, the exemption that you would use for that registration varies based on the total dollar amount. But essentially you issue the security, you put it over in the transfer agent, add the cryptographic key pairs. At that point, you could have something that's like a stock certificate with the key pairs right on it. You could have a physical in the real world too, almost like a bearer bond, truthfully. And then now that you've created that cryptographic key pair address, you could put that on whatever chain makes sense for you guys. You don't have to be tied to a particular thing. You could go home and fork the code of any existing chain and have it properly in-house versus managed by industry.
Thank you so much. Any questions? Any questions? I'll ask you the same question that's been asked with regard to, obviously, there are currently a number of products in the marketplace that we know of as far as stable tokens and stable coins. Is there any particular advantage or value that you see for a Wyoming stable token that differentiates it in the marketplace from others?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the number one thing that differentiates it is that it is a government issuing it. I work in a very deeply regulated space, but we're primarily technologists. The problem with this kind of intersection is you have the hardcore software nerds that are looking at protocol, they've got an engineering mindset, and they have absolute ignorance about securities law. They don't even know you're not allowed to just publicly go ask for money. And so they keep getting fined. I personally know someone who was fined for $500,000 after I told him, I'm like, I think what you're doing is a security. And he was basically like, no, it's not, because I don't want it to be. And I'm like, it would have cost him $10,000 to go get an exemption. Why would you not just, spend a little bit of money to get the exemption in the first place? The other side of things is that you get people that do have a background in either finance or academics, whatever, and they cannot tell any of the technology apart. It's absolute magic under the hood to them. And so, there can be catastrophic software security, failures that you're like, this is literally just whoever figures this out first is going to run off with all of it and go God knows where. So it's really a trick to find somebody that has both the legal side and the engineering side together. And so what we have in industry is a lot of disproportionate kind of like, I guess, crypto anarchists are the experts that are getting hired into these companies, and maybe don't necessarily have an appreciation for how the laws are intended to protect the population, which includes all of these individuals. So I think having a government issued stablecoin brings the trust and confidence of, hey, I could find these people. There's not literally just a little board that's going to run off to another country with billions of dollars.
Go ahead, Representative Western.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So if I hear you correctly, it sounds like you're saying that Mr. Revel is expressing concerns that because of someone like Circle, the proof of concept they've had with USDC, that it's going to make a hard, steep hill to climb. If I'm hearing Mr. Revel correctly, you're saying that because of the authority and the legitimacy of being a state,
Yeah.
that is a major advantage and is a big enough one to overcome the advantages that USDC has.
Yeah.
Is that correct?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Thank you. Yeah, exactly. I think the advantage is, in industry, you have the ability to be super nimble. If, government makes a law against something, I can just change the name of it and wait for them to catch up, right? The disadvantage is that while they have the money and, a lot of the brain talent, they don't actually have the law in hand. And so a lot of times it is going back and forth to try and, like even with Caitlin's question earlier, like, well, if it does become a security, then what, we've been in the seat where it takes 21 months to we're getting an alternative trading system designation added to our broker dealer. Literally in month 21 of something that's not even a real application. It should be like a notice to file. If you're coming at it from the government side, you've got that in hand. You literally have the power to do what makes sense up front instead of play Mother May I for 3 years.
Paul, Representative. All right. Anyone else? Seeing none, thank you so
All
much.
right,
Appreciate
thanks, guys.
you being
Appreciate
here.
it.
Good to see you.
Do I turn this off?
Yes, please. Excellent. Is there any further public comment? Come on up, please join us. Even though you've already introduced yourself, please do so again. Good to see you.
Thanks for having me. Name is John Stooks, founder of Space Style LLC. So I guess this development is pretty interesting and bring the testimony about DAO managed treasuries and how a Wyoming stable coin can make that process more fluid here within the state. A lot of this protocol funding comes from these tokens that have, variances in their price discovery, and, having mechanisms that can convert that to a Wyoming stable coin can potentially protect the interests of the organization. And then, as with our developments of defining a new asset class for space assets, and bringing that within the state of Wyoming, we feel like Wyoming's stablecoin could be critical to development of that. And then I'd like to bring a philosophical argument about money as a language. And so if we look at money as a language and how it's evolved over time, and where it has been juxtaposed between this clunky system evolving into this, digital ecosystem. It's previously money has been, or this language has been clunky and hasn't been able to translate well over borders. And we're evolving this language into a machine language that can essentially, arbitrate these, values and our expressions and communication. So we could, hash out a blockchain into a book, right? And I can mail each one of you that book. At that point, it becomes speech, it becomes language, it becomes protected speech. So how question I present is, how would you regulate, cryptocurrency in the context of free speech?
Mr. Co-Chairman, you got an answer for that?
Representative Stiff.
Representative Stiff, over to you.
Mr. Chairman, I appreciate the novel approach to it, but I not since reading Jacques Derrida and other things, I really haven't thought about the language implications of mediums of exchange. However, I would say that we can properly regulate the time, manner, and place of speech. So I think we'll get through that.
All right. Any other thoughts on that? Well, I think that's a conversation that probably should be had over a pint, if I'm not mistaken.
All right.
But thank you for bringing that to us. Any further questions? All right. Thank you.
All right,
Appreciate your
thank
public
you.
comment. Good to see you. All right. Any further public comment at this time? All right. Seeing none. Any online that we? Okay. Public comment is closed. Back to the committee. So committee, what do we want to do? Go ahead, Mr. Bill.
I have an idea that I wanted to share. That if just talking about the stable token being backed by US dollars and being unclear of the market adoption and competition that we would face there. Thinking instead of what is it that Wyoming has that is a unique advantage that others wouldn't have, like private sector companies, and it's our mineral reserves. So let's just take oil or gas as an example. We have a unique ability to potentially create an oil-backed state stable token or a gas or coal or any other mineral. You could sort of expand this over time to the extent that there were, I think, to the extent that there are auditable or verifiable reserves of oil and gas that the state has. Could we issue this stable token, not backed by the dollar or pegged to the dollar, but backed by our oil reserves, for example, and pegged to the value of the oil, which would then, I think there would be a huge use case in the financial markets for hedging purposes, et cetera. DeFi platforms being built around the value of oil and yield off of it. And our competition is Venezuela and Russia, which I would rather have than Circle as a competitor. And I think that the use case for Venezuela and Russia, critics would argue, was to sidestep international sanctions. This is clearly a different use case here.
Subcommittee thoughts? Go ahead, Representative Western and then Representative Bien.
Mr. Chairman. I mean, I don't think as a state, obviously, the state of Wyoming only has authority over its over state-owned lands and state-owned minerals. Are we allowed to actually pledge production itself? Here's my question, because I could see us pledging options on royalties when those minerals get developed, but the actual production, or I guess, what are we collateralizing here? Is it just the rights, the royalty rights, held by production?
Mr. Reveal, thoughts?
Reserves.
Chairman, so that would,
ahead, Mr.
that would basically just be production then.
Mr. Reveal, thoughts?
I mean, oil in the can we actually pledge oil in the ground? And I don't.
That's what you would be. It would be backed by oil in the ground, but there would need to be, this is going beyond my knowledge, but I believe there would need to be some remedy that you could get that oil out and sell it to make that reserve worth anything. But that's just a guess, to be honest.
Other discussion, Representative Bien, I saw your hand.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think that is a novel concept and it's a different product. I mean, essentially it is a very different product, right? So a stable token, I think in the sense that we have it in the bill we have in front of us is essentially meant for a means of exchange. Well, I do think we end up, if we peg it to a reserve, then it does end up being an investment. And is that something that we would like? Because I think if our goal is to allow for these, it does allow for a different set of new business, but I think the business proposition for the stable token right now is just to make it that much easier to exchange in between dollars and crypto. And I do worry that with your solution, I mean, maybe we could do both. But I think right now we should decide whether we want to do what we have on the table first.
Go ahead, Mr. Reveal.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Representative Yen. I agree, it is not mutually exclusive at all. I think my reason for bringing it up is in just kind of searching for a competitive advantage that would drive adoption in the marketplace, and my fear that we could build this dollar-backed stable token and not really get any adoption out of it. Whereas I think we would have a very natural structural advantage in the marketplace with an oil-backed or gas-backed stable token, but wouldn't need to be mutually exclusive.
Yeah, and honestly, I mean, that's where I'm at. I don't think they are mutually exclusive, and I see the advantages that you're laying out as being very real and plausible advantages. Go ahead, Mr. Kaufman.
Yeah, I think, Mr. Chairman, I just want to pile in here a little bit. I think this is an incredibly novel and super exciting idea. And to me, they're very different, right? Because one is monetizing future value in ground. As Mr. Revelle said, it's got to be auditable, verifiable. That's what the market's calling for, right? Is some settlement stable tokens that have provable value. And so from that standpoint, I think it's really exciting. Again, you have the power and weight of the state behind it, right? It'd have to be state-owned minerals in this context. And we're still getting potentially the benefit of everything we were talking about with respect to the float, right? Getting the treasurer's office the ability to, in the meantime, earn a float off of those advanced. And take it even one step further with the continuing conversations of the declining market for many of our minerals, right? Why wouldn't we seek to monetize those now? So that's super interesting. I just want to make a quick comment on the stable token, though. I still see a real potential use case for that. I don't know any better than anybody else about the market's reception to our stable token versus any other. But I still think that there's a way that that could be rolled out. And again, I'm not the constitutional guy. I haven't done the constitutional analysis. I do worry about that. And admittedly, I've told many of you when the Stable Token Act first was revealed last year, that was one of my concerns, was the constitutional aspects. Maybe that's been answered, but the less like a medium of exchange and a payment mechanism that looks like, to me, the better chance we have of that being successful on a legal challenge. So in that respect, to the extent our stable token could look more like a settlement mechanism for, Wyoming SPDIs and trust companies, that to me is really interesting, because we could structure that in such a way that it is at least difficult for difficult to reach by the SEC as being characterized as a security. And I've exchanged with a few of you some ideas about, there's this concept of intrastate offerings and securities, right? Where you're not engaging in interstate commerce, thus you don't invoke the jurisdiction of the SEC. Well, in the same way that municipal bonds or, state issued bonds are issued, those are exempt securities generally. And as Ms. Long was getting at with her question, there's a couple of ways that those regs are invoked. One is the issuance of what you're issuing, and one is the method and manner of the offering. And what Ms. Long, I believe, was getting at with her question is, okay, maybe we've answered part of that question of what is the instrument itself? Is it a security or not by definition? But what about the manner of offering? And so what I'm proposing that maybe we look at with respect to the Stable Token Act is, maybe we've answered the question of, is it a security to begin with? But what about the manner of offering? Maybe there's a way to ensure that the distribution of that doesn't cross the lines of making it unconstitutional as a right, minting a coin, but secondarily we restrict in some logical way the distribution of that, so we stay out of the reach of the SEC at the same time. That to me becomes really interesting, because I guess I share everyone's concern that maybe there's, who knows how the market's going to receive our Wyoming stable token. But if we could construct that in a way that we purposefully keep ourselves out of the reach of the federal regulators as much as possible, I think we dramatically increase the attractiveness of that stable token. I'll stop there.
Thank you for that, Mr. Bill. Follow.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Kaufman, great points. I want to go back to something you said, which is monetizing our assets, and just spend a second on that, because we are monetizing them in a way, but to be clear, we wouldn't be selling. This isn't like what I've heard the state contemplate in the past, which is it's sort of an asset-backed security and selling this, but this is more like pledging these assets in the same way that you would pledge appreciated securities or your home for a mortgage. So these will be encumbered assets that can't be used for any other purpose or pledged for any other purpose, but they're not sold. Right? We're just pledging them as a reserve against some 32-digit character that we're going to put out into the DeFi world.
Any additional thoughts, committee? We're,
Say one real quick.
all right, very
quick thing,
quickly.
Ms.
Yep.
Hammond. It could be really interesting doing a hybrid model where those assets are pegged to the Wyoming stablecoin, just like we did with the petrodollar, so that when those assets are sold, so right now they're just reserves, they're just the asset itself. But then when they're traded or sold, the Wyoming stablecoin becomes the mechanism for that transaction.
Smart
and-
contract
right,
vehicle.
yeah.
Yeah, that's good. Thank you for that. Any additional thoughts on that? So again, I think the fact that they're non-mutually exclusive, I think we can pursue both of these paths and should pursue both of these paths. And I do think that the possibility of having them work together, if we don't end up getting our Wyoming stable token shot down at some point along the path, is valuable. Mr. Co-Chairman, thoughts?
That's it. I think we take them one at a time. I would like to understand Mr. Reveal's, I don't want to, yeah, I would like to take them one at a time. I would really like to understand the fluctuations that will occur in the market and how they will affect the value of that token. And that gives me, I mean, that's no different than the fluctuations in any investment, I suppose, that I would have, but I view it very different from the stable token, which is stable. Mr. Bill.
Go ahead, Mr. Bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The value would fluctuate with the value of oil, and
Yeah.
that is sort of the point.
Yeah.
So participant in the market, whether industry or financial services, would use this as a reference value for purposes of speculating, hedging, etc. So I think there's an enormous use case. This would, sort of thinking out loud here, but I think would probably be competing against other commodity derivatives.
Right.
Is probably who we're competing against. But what is unique about this is that it is competing with other commodity hedges, but will do so in this new Web3 world.
Yeah. Yeah, that's what I took
And the
as your value.
platforms that could be built are kind of infinite possibilities.
Yep, agreed. I think it's.
I agree. I just think it's market use is not going to be where stability is required in the transaction like the stable coin.
Go ahead, Mr. Bill.
Mr. Chairman, stability to the price of oil needs to be ensured. So the idea of a stable token is that it is pegged to the value of something. And what we've been talking about to date is pegged to the value of a US dollar. But it can be pegged to the value of really anything.
If I'm buying my oil in oil token, the price is stable. That's the beauty of it.
And some people would argue you'd rather have oil than dollars.
Yeah, right.
Well, there's that.
Right.
I might want to own some of that.
Representative Western, and then I see Representative Stiff as well.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I certainly agree with the general dialogue that this is a really interesting concept with a ton of potential. I think the market receptivity to this, I would imagine, would be contingent on buyers who are looking for something that they are okay with this asset fluctuating greatly in price. Because if we do look at the history of these commodity-backed securities or whatever you want, these derivatives, there's a history of a lot of volatility in there. And so I think, are we looking at customers that are looking for the stable and stable coin, or are they looking for something that they're still going to find value, even though they understand that given market conditions and market participants, small producers, large producers, et cetera, that there could be a lot of volatility in the value of the collateralized asset. I guess I don't know.
I think in that circumstance, you have something like an airline where a tremendous amount of its cost is going to be associated with fuel. If they can then work in a token that is based on the price of oil, then and use that effectively as their purchasing mechanism, so to speak. And even though they probably liquidate it and transact in cash, but if they're transacting over time in the space of an oil-backed stable token, it's stable with regard to oil, then they've effectively neutralized the market effect of the cost of the fuel on their cost of operation, because they would just steadily purchase the asset over time. Mr. Reville.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Western, the value of that stable token would be volatile in US dollar terms, but that is not the terms that the user is thinking in. So just as an example, flip it upside down and say that you operate in oil and the dollar is very volatile against what you do. So, that's just a way to think about it. So people that operate in oil, either as speculators or as industry operators, don't want the volatility that the dollar represents. They want to be in base terms of oil. And that's what this would enable. And I also just the thoughts are kind of rolling in, but the current commodity hedging market is inefficient in the sense that you have to roll hedges. And I don't know for sure what I'm saying is true, but I think that this might create a more cost-effective hedge that doesn't require rolling.
Representative Stith down in the weeds with us.
Mr. Chairman, yes, always happy to go into the rabbit hole. So I guess if we did have a token that was pegged to a barrel of oil, then you really could administratively put it within the State Loan and Investment Board, because the administrative arm of SLIB is the Office of State Lands and Investment, which manages 3.9 million subsurface acres of land in Wyoming. Okay, but my question for Mr. Reville is, let's imagine you actually did this and one token equals 1 barrel of oil. So I'm a token holder, I've got a token, and I come to the Office of State Lands and Investment and I say, here's my token, give me a barrel of oil. Is that what happens? And how does the state process that request to redeem my token for the barrel of oil?
All right,
How do I take delivery?
Mr. Reville, quickly on that, and then we'll go to Mr. Cochran.
I don't think it would be any different than the way we've currently drafted the existing Stable Token Act, where someone could come with their token and demand a US dollar. And perhaps, Mr. Chairman, I might defer to you on how you think that might work in this current version of the draft.
Yeah, and again, the regrettable answer on that is there'd be a lot of rule and regulation on exactly how that would work, because we wouldn't want an individual to come and ask for a single dollar probably from the treasurer's office. So we'll have to set up some transactional concepts about it needs to be in a certain amount, but it would be the same thing. We'd figure out how to yield that. But in the interest of time, we've hit up against our break. Let's have a quick comment by Mr. Co-Chairman, and then
No, Mr. Co-Chairman, I wasn't going to make a comment. I was
Uh-huh.
just going to maybe,
wrap it up.
well, maybe have a motion on the bill so we can discuss the bill. I mean, we're discussing a lot of hypotheticals, but if there's not even an interest in drafting the bill, I feel like we're just kind of spinning our wheels.
Well,
And I'm not saying I'm not interested
yeah.
in it. I'm just trying to move us forward with the bill we have in front of us as well.
Excellent. Very briefly, Representative Western, did you have something you wanted to add before we get to that point? Hopefully, really brief.
I'll just,
Good choice. All right, so Mr. Co-Chairman, my thought was there's work that needs to be done here. This is our actually working draft. This is a committee bill for consideration, but I don't think we want to take final action on it. It sounds like we need to work with the treasurer's office and the governor's office to resolve all of the administrative concerns, come back with an amended draft consistent with those concerns. We had some staff comments about that I think many of them need to be taken into consideration. For example, whether the account that pays token holders should be separated from the operating account, right? That was a logistical concept that we have to create that separation. Treasurer's office brought that back. So I'd be inclined to take into consideration all of the feedback and discussion that we've had, work that into a next bill draft for our consideration at the next meeting, and see if there's anything that our members have to suggest that they want included for that next bill draft. Go
And
ahead.
I'm not sure how to procedurally approach this. But I would like Mr. Co-Chairman to consider the idea of a separate entity, if that is slip, and maybe we just need two bills in front of us to do that. But that's a fundamental change substantively to the bill. I get working through some of the other nuances, ringing off accounts, et cetera, things like that, but I would, I don't know, how do you see that? Mr. Co-Chairman, do you want two different bills for that, or do you just, how do you want to approach that?
We could have an alt draft. I think that's a reasonable approach, or even, I mean, maybe it's just divisible within one where we have a staff comment we can choose. It might not be that easy, and it might need to have two alt bill drafts, one drafted more consistent with how this is, another with a separate agency, or not a separate agency, but a separate entity. And again, I don't see the administrative aspects of it if we move org chart lines and come up with how it's going to be administered as that substantive, because that's not, I mean, the point of the bill is not the administration. The point of the bill is the Wyoming stable token. So the question, I guess, is how much flexibility is the select committee willing to give in terms of trying to reach a satisfactory org chart that both the treasurer's office and the governor's office are at least semi-happy with?
Well, and I think in contemplating that, one thing we have discussed that I think everyone is agreeing on is the subject matter expert.
Yeah.
I suppose that can be folded in either way, but,
Yeah.
you know, essentially, at least a position needs to be created or contemplated in some type of a transfer to effectuate that.
Agreed. Well,
we're not.
we weren't going to move
We're
it.
not gonna, that's what we're
Yeah.
talking about.
We were just going to move it along, so to speak, unless
Senator
you want to
Cotton,
do otherwise.
if you want to produce the bill now, we're thinking coming back in November with these edits to walk through the bill on a final vote then.
Yeah.
And what I'm contemplating is frankly a different bill, I suppose. So I'm not, that's why I'm asking the co-chairman how he wants to address
From
that.
the administrative side, it's just
From the
again, from the
administrative side.
logistics of how to run this based on the discussion we had today. Without objection, and I see the treasurer would like to.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman,
weigh in, please do.
if you're thinking of a separate entity, I'd suggest you use an instrumentality as an organizational structure. That allows quite a little bit more flexibility in the decision-making process.
A little quasi thing, okay.
Yeah, yeah,
Understood.
and I know the WCDA has both a representative, it's either the governor or the treasurer or their designee, you know, plus other appointees by the governor, I believe, in that regard. And, you know, maybe it would be other appointees by the Oversight Committee or something, you know, if you guys want to get your feet wet in that regard. But I'm definitely open to, you know, talking with the governor, finding out what his true areas of heartburn are. I know that I think you've hit the nail on the head as far as getting the subject matter expertise in that. Yeah. And then trying to move that structure as forward as we can. The fact that the governor and I can decide on 3 subject matter expertise for the process of giving us guidance that we can both rely on. I think that would be a good way for the governor, myself, and our office to move forward with something that we should all agree on.
Great, thank you, Treasurer. All right. With that, unless there's any objection, Mr. Co-Chairman, shall we proceed along that path where we're going to rework the organization and have a draft that we hope to achieve consensus between the governor's office and the treasurer's office?
Okay.
Bring that back in November.
All right.
That'll work, right? And if not,
I think, sorry, Mr. Hopkinson,
Mr. Chairman, that's not quite enough guidance for me to know what you want.
Mr. Hopkinson, I took that to mean that co-chairman and I will work with you on the structure of the bill.
Yeah, and the governor's office and the treasurer's
And-
office to
and
get
the
something
governor's
that's
office
agreed
and
to.
the treasurer's office.
Correct.
It's a select committee, statutory, actually.
Yes.
I am interested in pursuing something with Mr. Reville's idea so that we can have it in front of us to further discuss it.
I think it ends up needing an entirely new bill
Separate
draft, and that's gonna be a bit of a challenge for meeting number last.
Between now and November?
Yeah, but that'll be the last one we have to decide it.
It's a couple months away. Mr. Co-Chairman,
You want to look at it?
it's intriguing.
It is intriguing.
If there's not, there was discussion on the committee. I assumed that meant that there was interest in it.
I think
don't-
there's interest. I think it needs to move forward. I think we'd struggle to have that as a bill that came out of this select committee.
Mr. Reville.
Sorry.
Go ahead, Mr. Bill.
A question, Mr. Chairman. You had mentioned that you think it would require a separate bill draft. And there may be reasons that I don't appreciate why that's necessary as it relates to state mechanisms. As it relates to how a stable token would work, it should be fairly similar. I would think in terms of the
I think my concern there is opening up an entirely new sector. So we've spent quite a bit of time and we're actually struggling to get to the point where we have the governor's office's buy-in, substantially changing the legislation at this point in time to do some other things that haven't been fully vetted, I guess would be a concern. And again, it's not to say we can't do exactly what you're suggesting, but hanging enough features on it, each feature then becomes something that we have to vet. And it seems to me that going down this path, once we have a path established, coming back and running another piece of legislation that does exactly that when we've established an approach is much more straightforward than the version 1.0. So I'm trying to focus on a version 1.0 that gets across the finish line, understanding that we almost got there this last year and didn't quite make it. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And there are, I would obviously defer to you all and your knowledge of how the legislative process works. My 2 cents to add for your consideration is market-based, which is that if I'm hearing that it would be difficult to get a US dollar backed Wyoming stable token done by the end of 2023, that I'm just reading into it maybe means an oil backed Wyoming stable token by the end of 2024, the ship will have sailed. Texas, Oklahoma, New Mexico stable tokens will be out there.
No, it's a fair point, and obviously first mover, first to market is an essential point. Mr. Co-Chairman? Well, we can discuss this more, and it's certainly not the end of the conversation. The idea again that the second product has to be as slow as the first is, I don't think, necessarily the case. And there is a long process ahead where we can reflect on this still. And if we see a clean change or an alternative authorization, or once this is done, we may take this path. Maybe there are some things that we can get comfortable with. And I think it's worth following up then with the treasurer and the governor and others and discussing and exploring that. See if it, you know, if that makes it more attractive, then maybe that is the right approach. Thank you. All right, so without objection, let's proceed in and spend some time reworking this draft for November. Mr. Co-Chairman and I will work with Mr. Hopkinson, Treasurer's Office, Governor's Office, to bring back something that is hopefully more universally appealing. And with that, let's go to break. It is 11:15. Let's come back from break at 11:30, and we'll start our digital asset bill drafts. We are just going to have a hard lunch at noon, to be clear. So we'll take the stop at noon, and then we'll come back and continue our digital asset bill draft discussion after that noon lunch at 1:30. So see you all back here at 11:30.